This story is titled, My Parents Wanted to Give My Share of Inheritance to Their Favored Daughter, but Little Did They Realize What Was Coming. Hey everyone, I just wanted to share something real with you. The channel's been slowing down a bit recently, and honestly, I put a lot of time and effort into finding these stories to keep bringing you the best content. If you enjoy what I do, it would mean the world if you hit that subscribe button. Your support really makes all the difference and keeps this journey going strong. Thanks so much for being here with me. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, Hey Reddit, I guess I'm just venting here, but maybe someone will relate. My name's Jordan, and I've spent my whole life feeling like an afterthought. It wasn't always obvious to me when I was younger, but as I got older I realized my parents had a favorite, and it wasn't me. My younger sister Chloe, 25 now, was always their golden child. I'm 28, and while you'd think the whole sibling rivalry thing fades with age, the truth is, when favoritism is this blatant, it leaves a mark. Let me start from the beginning. When I was 5 and Chloe was 2, we both had birthdays that year, obviously. My parents threw Chloe this ridiculously over-the-top party. I'm talking bouncy castles, a petting zoo, face painters, and even a clown. They went all out for her. I can still remember sitting on the lawn, eating some cake and petting a goat, but what stuck out the most was when someone asked me, Wow, do you think you'll get a party like this for your birthday? And I said, No, mine already passed. Yeah. For my birthday that same year, I got a store-bought cake from the grocery store and a family dinner at home. That's it. No big deal, right? But even as a kid, I noticed the difference. It set the tone for everything that came after. Chloe always got the best of everything. She had the newest toys, the cutest clothes, and most importantly, my parents' full attention. Me? I was told to be patient, share, or just deal with it. One time, when I was around 10, I saved up my allowance for months, to buy a new bike. It was my pride and joy. The day I finally brought it home, Chloe saw it and decided she wanted one too. She started crying and throwing a tantrum. Instead of teaching her about saving up or waiting her turn, my parents went out that same weekend and bought her an even better bike than mine. That moment stuck with me. It wasn't about the bike itself, it was the message. My hard work didn't matter. If Chloe wanted something, she got it. End of story. School was another battleground where the favoritism became impossible to ignore. I was the straight A student, the one who stayed up late studying, joined clubs, and genuinely tried to excel. My parents barely noticed. Meanwhile, Chloe was the kind of student who coasted through school, barely scraping by with C's. But if she got a B on a single test, oh, my parents would lose their minds with pride. They'd take her out for dinner or buy her something as a reward for her hard work. One time, in 4th grade, I got the lead role in the school play. I practiced for weeks and was so excited to perform. My parents promised they'd come and cheer me on. The night of the play, they showed up an hour late and missed my big scene. When I asked what happened, they said Chloe had a tummy ache and needed comforting. Later, I found out she was fine. They just lost track of time playing with her. I wish I could say this was a one-time thing, but it wasn't. High school was even worse. I threw myself into everything I could, hoping to get some recognition from them. I was captain of the debate team, editor of the school newspaper, and maintained a 4.0 GPA. My parents barely noticed. Chloe, on the other hand, spent most of her time hanging out with friends and partying, but my parents still treated her like she was the star of the family. One of the worst examples happened during my junior year. I was selected as one of 2 students from my school to attend a prestigious summer program at Harvard. It was a huge honor, and I was thrilled. I shared the news with my family at dinner, expecting at least some excitement. My dad grunted and said, That's nice, before changing the subject to Chloe's upcoming dance recital. My mom at least said, Good for you, but she was already pulling up pictures of Chloe in her recital costume to show everyone. Here's the kicker. My flight to Boston for the program was scheduled on the same day as Chloe's recital. My parents refused to drive me to the airport because they didn't want to miss her performance. I ended up having to ask a friend's parents for a ride. It was humiliating and hurtful, but at that point, I should have expected it. When it came time for college applications, I poured my heart and soul into the process. I spent months writing essays, studying for the SATs, and participating in every extracurricular activity I could. I ended up getting accepted into several top-tier universities, including my dream school, with a substantial scholarship. I remember announcing it at dinner, hoping for at least a little acknowledgement. My dad barely looked up from his plate and said, That's good, but don't let it go to your head. College isn't everything. My mom added, Just don't forget about us when you're off becoming a big shot. Meanwhile, when Chloe barely graduated high school and decided not to go to college, my parents praised her for knowing herself and not caving to societal pressures. They even bought her a car as a graduation present, something they never did for me. The constant favoritism took a toll on me emotionally. I struggled with depression and anxiety throughout my teens and early 20s. By the time I started college, I realized I needed help and began seeing a therapist. It was eye-opening. For the first time, someone validated my feelings and helped me understand that my parents' behavior wasn't my fault. It took years of work to build my self-esteem and learn to validate myself instead of seeking approval from my parents. Despite the lack of support from them, I managed to build a good life for myself. I graduated college with honors, landed a good job in finance, and even bought my own house by the time I was 27. I'm proud of what I've achieved, even if my parents aren't. But their favoritism wasn't just a childhood phase. It followed me into adulthood, and it's still affecting our family dynamics in ways I never imagined. 3 months ago, everything changed when my grandfather, David, passed away. Grandpa was one of the few people in my family who treated me and Chloe equally. He never played favorites, not with his kids or grandkids, and he believed in fairness above all else. Losing him hit me hard because he was one of the few people who truly saw me. Grandpa built a business from the ground up, a small family-run operation that eventually grew into something pretty significant. Over the years, he made sure his kids and grandkids understood the value of hard work, but he also made it clear that he wanted everyone to have equal opportunities. When his will was read, it reflected that mindset. His estate was divided equally among his children, my dad, Ethan, and his siblings, and his grandchildren. This included me, Chloe, and our cousins. When I learned my share was $500,000, I was in shock. That amount of money would completely change my life. I could finally pay off my student loans, invest in my future, and maybe even start my own business like Grandpa had. At first, I didn't think much about how my parents would react. I mean, this was Grandpa's decision, and I assumed they'd respect it. Boy, was I wrong. After the reading of the will, my parents pulled me aside. They weren't excited for me or happy about the opportunities this money could bring. Instead, they were visibly upset. My dad started by saying, "This doesn't seem fair." I was confused and asked what he meant. He went on to explain that Chloe needed the money more than I did. Their reasoning? Chloe still lives in their basement and works part-time at a coffee shop. According to them, she's struggling to find her footing and deserves a little extra help. They argued that since I already had a stable job, a house, and no major financial issues, other than my student loans, it would be the right thing to do for me to give my share to Chloe. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried to stay calm and explain that this wasn't my decision to make. It was Grandpa's. His will was clear, and he wanted all his grandchildren to be treated equally, but they wouldn't let it go. My dad said, "Do you really think it's fair for you to have all this money when your sister is struggling?" I was fuming inside, but kept my cool. I told them that while I understood they wanted to help Chloe, it wasn't fair to expect me to give up what Grandpa had left me. That's when the guilt tripping started. My dad brought up every instance he could think of where they had helped me. He mentioned paying for my braces when I was a kid, which by the way were medically necessary, buying me school supplies, and letting me live at home during college, even though I worked part-time and contributed to household expenses. He conveniently left out the fact that they bought Chloe a car, took her on countless shopping sprees, and still paid for everything she needed even as an adult. When I stood firm and said I wasn't giving up my inheritance, my dad's tone shifted. He said, "If you won't do the right thing, I'll make sure this is handled properly." That's when I realized how serious this was. My dad was the executor of Grandpa's will, and he was implying he'd take matters into his own hands. A few days later, he confirmed my worst fears. He announced to me, and the rest of the family, that he was going to reinterpret Grandpa's wishes. He planned to give Chloe my entire share of the inheritance on top of the share she was already getting. His reasoning? Grandpa would have wanted Chloe to have more if he'd fully understood her circumstances. I was devastated. This wasn't just about money. It was about years of being overlooked and undervalued. I felt like I was being told, once again, that my hard work and achievements didn't matter. At this point, I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I reached out to my grandmother, Linda, for advice. She was furious when I told her what was happening. Grandma had been married to Grandpa for over 50 years and knew exactly what his intentions were. She said, "This is absolutely not what David wanted. Your father has no right to change the will." Grandma didn't just stop at being angry. She took action. She contacted her lawyer and got in touch with the other executors of the will. She also looped in my dad's siblings, who were just as outraged as she was. Grandpa had even added a clause to his will specifically to prevent situations like this. It stated that anyone who contested the equal distribution of assets would forfeit their share entirely. When I confronted my parents with this information, they were stunned. My dad tried to backtrack, saying he was just trying to look out for Chloe's future. My mom, Megan, chimed in with, "You're blowing this out of proportion. This should have been handled in-house. Why involve everyone else?" I reminded them that Grandpa had always treated his grandchildren equally, and that he'd been fully aware of our situations when he wrote the will. That's when my mom accused me of speaking ill of the dead by suggesting Grandpa wouldn't have wanted what they were proposing. It was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard. Chloe, for her part, stayed mostly quiet during all this. When I tried to talk to her privately, she just shrugged and said, "Mom and Dad know best. I didn't ask for this." I didn't know whether to feel angry or sad. It wasn't her fault that our parents had spoiled her to the point of being completely dependent on them, but at the same time, I wished she'd stand up for me. Just this once. Thanks to Grandma and my dad's siblings, the will was ultimately upheld as written. My dad was removed as an executor due to his clear conflict of interest. I got my share of the inheritance, but the whole situation left a bitter taste in my mouth. My parents were furious. They accused me of turning the family against them and causing unnecessary drama. My dad even threatened to cut me out of their own will entirely, to which I replied, "I never expected anything from you anyway." That comment seemed to hit a nerve, but I didn't care. It felt like the final straw in a lifetime of being treated like I didn't matter. But as much as I wanted to move on, the fallout from this situation was far from over. After Grandpa's will was upheld, I thought the worst of it was over. I had my inheritance, and I naively believed my parents would back off after being legally forced to follow Grandpa's wishes. I was wrong. The fallout was just getting started, and it ended up being one of the most stressful times of my life. First, let me explain how my parents reacted. My dad, Ethan, was furious about being removed as an executor of the will. He accused me of conspiring with Grandma and the rest of the family to humiliate him. He said, "You don't know what you've done. You've ruined our family's reputation." I remember staring at him, trying to process how he could possibly see himself as the victim in all this. My mom, Megan, took a different approach. She leaned hard into the guilt tripping. She said things like, "I don't know how you can sleep at night knowing your sister is struggling while you're sitting on a pile of money." She brought up every so-called sacrifice they'd made for me growing up, conveniently leaving out the favoritism that had been shoved in my face for years. Chloe stayed quiet through most of this. I think she felt awkward about the whole situation, but she wasn't willing to go against our parents. When I tried to talk to her one-on-one, she just shrugged and said, "I didn't ask for this. It's between you and Mom and Dad." I could tell she was uncomfortable, but it still hurt that she wouldn't speak up for me. Then came the extended family drama. My dad tried to rally the family against me, spreading rumors that I had somehow manipulated Grandpa into leaving me money. He told anyone who would listen that I was selfish, greedy, and ungrateful. At one point, he even claimed that Grandma had brainwashed me into turning against the family. Thankfully, most of the extended family didn't buy into his narrative. Grandpa's will had been clear, and the clause about forfeiting shares if anyone contested the distribution shut down a lot of potential arguments. My dad's siblings were firmly on my side, and they weren't shy about voicing their support. They knew how hard I'd worked to get where I am, and how much favoritism my parents had shown Chloe over the years. But not everyone was supportive. A few cousins suggested that I should have just given Chloe the money to keep the peace. One of them even said, "It's not like you need it, right? You've got a good job and a house. Why not help your sister out?" That comment made my blood boil. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. Grandpa had made his wishes clear, and my parents had tried to twist those wishes to fit their narrative. Giving up my inheritance wouldn't have fixed anything. It would have just reinforced the idea that Chloe's needs and wants always come first, no matter what. The breaking point came about a month after the will was settled. My aunt, one of my dad's siblings, hosted a family gathering. She specifically didn't invite my parents because she wanted to avoid drama, but they showed up anyway. The tension in the room was unbearable the moment they walked in. My dad immediately started ranting about how I had betrayed the family and stolen from Chloe. He called me names and accused me of ruining my sister's life. My mom, ever the dramatist, threw an old photo album at my feet and said, "Look at all these happy memories you've destroyed." It was embarrassing, infuriating, and heartbreaking all at once. I didn't know how to respond. Thankfully, my aunt and a few other relatives stepped in and told my parents to leave. It turned into a shouting match, and eventually my dad stormed out, dragging my mom with him. After they left, I sat there feeling numb. I hated that it had come to this, but I also knew I couldn't keep letting them control me. For the first time, I realized just how much their favoritism had shaped my life, not just in terms of missed opportunities, but in how I saw myself. I decided to reach out to Grandma again. She had been my rock through this whole ordeal, and I needed her wisdom now more than ever. When I told her about the incident at the family gathering, she sighed and said, "Your dad's always been stubborn, but this is a new low. Don't let his behavior make you doubt yourself. You're doing the right thing." Grandma also shared something that completely changed how I saw the situation. Apparently, a few years ago, my parents had approached Grandpa and asked him to leave everything to Chloe in his will. Grandpa had firmly refused. He told them he believed in treating all his grandchildren equally and didn't want to create resentment within the family. Knowing that my parents had tried to manipulate Grandpa during his lifetime made their actions after his death even more infuriating. It also gave me a sense of validation. Grandpa had been clear about his wishes, and I wasn't going to let anyone twist them. Armed with this new information, I confronted my parents again. I asked them point blank why they thought it was okay to go against Grandpa's wishes. My dad tried to justify it by saying, "We were just looking out for Chloe's future. You'll be fine without the money." My mom added, "We didn't want to hurt you. We just thought Chloe needed it more." I wasn't buying it. I told them that if Grandpa had wanted Chloe to have more, he would have written the will that way. They didn't have an answer for that. The situation between us remains tense, but at least the legal battle is over. My dad was officially removed as an executor, and the will was executed as written. I got my inheritance, but the cost was high. I've stopped attending family dinners because I can't handle the cold shoulders and judgmental stares. My parents barely speak to me, and when they do, it's usually to guilt trip me or accuse me of causing drama. Despite all this, I feel a small sense of empowerment. For the first time in my life, I stood up to my parents and refused to be sidelined. It's terrifying and liberating all at once. But the emotional toll is real. I've started having anxiety attacks again, something I hadn't dealt with since college. I've been considering going back to therapy to help me process everything. This situation has brought up so many old wounds, and I know I need to heal if I want to move forward. The fallout isn't over, but I'm determined to hold my ground. Grandpa believed in me, and I'm not going to let his faith in me be in vain. Update 1 point. One night, I broke down and called Chloe. I told her how much it hurt that she wasn't standing up for me, even though she knew our parents were in the wrong. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "I didn't ask for this, Jordan. I never wanted to be in the middle of all this drama." "I know," I said, "but you're not in the middle, Chloe. You're benefiting from it. They've spent our whole lives putting you first and me second. And now they're trying to take something that Grandpa left for both of us and give it all to you. Don't you see how unfair that is?" There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought she might actually agree with me. But instead she said, "I don't know, Jordan. I just want things to go back to the way they were." That was the last time I reached out to her for a while. I couldn't keep trying to fix things with someone who didn't want to see the bigger picture. But something changed a few weeks later. Chloe called me out of the blue and asked if we could meet for coffee. I was hesitant, but I agreed. When we sat down, she looked nervous. "I've been thinking about what you said," she started, "about how Mom and Dad have treated you. And you're right. It's not fair. It's never been fair." I was stunned. Chloe went on to say that she'd talked to Grandma and heard some stories about our childhood that she didn't even remember. She admitted that being the favorite wasn't as great as it seemed. "They've always done everything for me," she said. "Bought me things, bailed me out of trouble, made excuses for me. But it's left me feeling like I can't do anything on my own. Watching you stand up to them, it made me realize I want more for myself." Hearing her say that was like a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time, I felt like she truly understood where I was coming from. We talked for hours about our childhood, our parents, and how their favoritism had shaped both of our lives in different ways. Chloe told me she'd decided to use her share of the inheritance to go to college. She said she didn't know what she wanted to study yet, but she was excited to finally take control of her own life. I couldn't have been prouder of her. It felt like we were finally starting to rebuild our relationship, not as rivals, but as siblings who actually supported each other. Of course, our parents weren't thrilled about Chloe's decision. My mom tried to guilt her into staying home, saying she was abandoning the family. My dad barely spoke to her at all, which hurt Chloe more than she let on. But despite their reaction, Chloe stood firm, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. Update 2.0. While Chloe and I were working on rebuilding our relationship, our parents were doubling down on their bitterness. Let me start with my mom, Megan. After Chloe announced she was going to college, my mom tried every guilt trip in the book to stop her. She said things like, "You're leaving us just when we need you the most." And, "College isn't for everyone, Chloe. You don't have to prove anything to anyone." It was obvious she didn't want Chloe to grow independent. She liked having Chloe under their control, where they could keep playing the hero by bailing her out whenever things got tough. But Chloe wasn't budging. For the first time, she was standing up for herself. And for me too, in a way. When our mom tried to bring me into her arguments, saying things like, "You're just following Jordan's bad example," Chloe shut her down. She told her, "This isn't about Jordan. This is about me wanting to live my own life." Hearing that gave me so much hope. It wasn't easy for Chloe to break free from our parents' hold, and I knew how much courage it took for her to take that step. My dad, Ethan, was a whole different story. He barely spoke to either of us after the college announcement. When he did, it was cold and dismissive. He told Chloe she was wasting her inheritance on school and said she'd regret it when she couldn't handle the pressure. For me, his anger turned into outright hostility. He started spreading more rumors about me within the family, claiming that I was corrupting Chloe and tearing the family apart. It hurt, but at this point I was used to his manipulative tactics. The breaking point came when my dad threatened to sell our childhood home. He called me one day out of nowhere and said, "If you and Chloe don't come to your senses, I'm putting the house on the market. Maybe then you'll realize what you're throwing away." I was stunned. The house wasn't just a piece of property. It was where we grew up, where we spent holidays, where so many memories were made. But I wasn't going to let him use it as leverage. I told him, "Do what you want with the house, Dad. I'm not going to let you manipulate me anymore." After that, I stopped answering his calls. Despite the chaos, Chloe and I started spending more time together. We made it a point to meet up at least once a month, just the two of us. At first, it was a little awkward. We weren't used to being this close. But as time went on, we started opening up about our lives, our childhood, and how we both wanted to move forward. One day, Chloe surprised me by saying, "You know, I used to envy you." I almost laughed, thinking she was joking. "Envy me? For what?" "For being so independent," she said. "For not needing them the way I always have. I thought being the favorite meant I had it better, but now I see it just kept me stuck." That hit me harder than I expected. For years, I'd been angry at Chloe for benefiting from our parents' favoritism, but I never thought about how it had held her back. It made me realize that we were both victims of the same toxic dynamic, just in different ways. As Chloe started her college journey, I threw myself into making the most of my inheritance. I paid off my student loans first, which was a huge relief. Then I worked with a financial advisor to set up investments and savings for the future. But I didn't stop there. Inspired by the therapy I'd started during college, I decided to use some of the money to give back. I donated to local mental health organizations and even started planning a small scholarship fund for kids from families like mine, kids who needed a little help to break free from difficult circumstances. Through all of this, my grandma, Linda, was my biggest supporter. She reminded me of how proud Grandpa would have been to see me standing up for myself and using my inheritance wisely. She even shared more stories about him, how he used to brag about my accomplishments to his friends, how he kept a scrapbook of my achievements, and how he always believed I'd do something meaningful with my life. Those stories gave me strength. For so long, I felt invisible in my own family. But knowing that Grandpa saw me and believed in me was incredibly healing. Meanwhile, my mom was making small steps toward reconciliation. She started going to therapy at Grandma's urging, and after a few months, she reached out to me. She admitted that she hadn't always been fair and asked if we could talk. I agreed, cautiously. I wasn't ready to forgive her completely, but I wanted to see if she was serious about changing. We met for lunch, and for the first time in my life, she actually listened to me. She didn't try to defend herself or make excuses. She just listened. It wasn't perfect, and I'm still keeping my boundaries firm, but it felt like a step in the right direction. My dad, on the other hand, refused to budge. He still acted like he was the victim, blaming me and Chloe for the family's problems. He missed several family events because he didn't want to be in the same room as me, and when he did show up, he made sure to make his disapproval known. As painful as it was, I had to accept that he might never change. It wasn't easy, but therapy helped me come to terms with the fact that I couldn't control his behavior. I could only control my own. Through it all, I've learned so much about the true meaning of family. It's not about blood or tradition. It's about the people who truly support and care for you. For me, that's been Grandma, Chloe, and a few close friends who've stood by me through everything. I'm still working on healing from the scars my parents left, but for the first time in years, I feel like I'm on the right path. I'm building a life that makes me happy, free from their toxic expectations. And honestly, that feels better than any inheritance ever could.